Jung discovered that people who never run out of things to say aren't naturally gifted speakers. They're not extroverts. They're not even particularly clever. Picture yourself in a conversation that should flow effortlessly, maybe with a new colleague, a potential friend, or someone you're genuinely interested in. But instead of connection, you feel that familiar tightness in your chest. The words dry up. Your mind goes blank. Jung realized something unsettling about this experience. Your silence isn't from lacking things to say. You actually have hundreds of thoughts racing through your mind. But there's a psychological filter system operating beneath your awareness, rejecting authentic thoughts before they reach your lips. Today, I'll reveal Jung's discovery about what he called the collective conversation and why your social anxiety is actually a sign of unexpressed psychological depth. Here's what makes this unsettling. Most people believe conversation flows naturally for persons, while others are just destined to struggle socially. But Jung found something darker operating beneath the surface. Every time you think, that's too random, or they won't care about that, you're strengthening psychological defense mechanisms designed to protect you from perceived rejection. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But here's what he didn't say publicly. Most people never allow this transformation because they're too busy performing social safety instead of risking authentic contact. The real truth lives beneath what Jung called persona conversations. Interactions where you're so focused on maintaining your social mask that you've disconnected from the vast reservoir of authentic thoughts your psyche naturally generates. What Jung found was that exceptional conversationalists weren't performing better, they were filtering less. The unconscious conversation stream. What I call the unconscious conversation stream was Jung's breakthrough insight into why some people seem to effortlessly navigate social interaction while others freeze up despite being intelligent and thoughtful. Jung observed, "Your vision becomes clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." He discovered that every human mind generates what he termed a continuous stream of psychological associations, countless thoughts, observations, memories, and insights that arise spontaneously in response to social interaction. Meet Sarah, a 32-year-old software engineer who came to therapy convinced she was boring because she constantly ran out of things to say at work events. During our sessions, she demonstrated remarkable insight, humor, and curiosity, but in social situations her mind would go blank. Jung would recognize this immediately. Sarah wasn't lacking conversational material. She was unconsciously filtering out 90% of her authentic thoughts before they reached conscious expression. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The problem isn't an empty mind, but an overactive psychological filter. Sarah's psyche was generating dozens of potential responses to every comment. Questions about her colleagues' experiences, observations about office dynamics, connections to her own interests. But her unconscious safety system rejected them all as potentially revealing too much or seeming inappropriate. This is why conversation flows effortlessly with close friends, but feels forced with new people. With friends, your psychological defenses relax, allowing more of this natural stream to reach conscious expression. You're not actually more interesting around friends, you're just filtering less of your authentic psychological material. Comment below if you've experienced this difference between flowing conversation with close friends versus struggling with new people. I filter less with people I trust. Shadow censorship patterns. The second pattern Jung identified was what I call shadow censorship, the unconscious rejection of thoughts that don't align with your idealized social persona. Jung understood, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In conversation, This darkness includes all the authentic thoughts you've learned to suppress because they might reveal aspects of yourself you've deemed socially unacceptable. Let me show you how to spot this in action. Watch how you respond internally when someone mentions a topic you have strong feelings about. Let's say they mention workplace stress. Your shadow might generate thoughts like, "I actually hate my job too. Management has no idea what they're doing," or "I've thought about quitting." But your persona immediately senses these as too negative or unprofessional. Meet David, a 28-year-old marketing professional who described feeling like he had nothing interesting to contribute during client dinners. When we explored his internal experience, David revealed that his mind was actually extremely active during these conversations. He noticed micro-expressions, questioned business strategies, and had strong opinions about industry trends. But his psychological conditioning from childhood, where expressing contrary opinions led to criticism, had trained him to suppress anything that might create conflict. Jung's analysis reveals 3 levels of shadow censorship operating simultaneously. Surface censorship, rejecting thoughts that seem inappropriate for the current context. Identity censorship, suppressing thoughts that contradict your professional or social persona. Existential censorship, avoiding thoughts that reveal deeper fears, desires, or philosophical positions. The people who never run out of things to say haven't developed better social skills. They've developed better access to their own authentic psychological material by integrating rather than rejecting their shadow aspects. Why filtering systems develop? Why do these psychological filtering systems develop in the first place? Jung's analytical psychology reveals the systematic reasons behind conversational anxiety that most social skills training completely misses. Jung discovered that what he called persona development, the creation of our social mask, begins in early childhood as a survival mechanism. Children learn to suppress authentic expression when it leads to criticism, withdrawal of affection, or social rejection. This creates what Jung termed psychological splitting, where parts of your authentic self become unconscious to protect social acceptance. The filtering system operates through 3 interconnected psychological processes Jung identified. Projection anxiety. You unconsciously assume others will judge your authentic thoughts the way your early caregivers did, creating anticipatory rejection before you even speak. Shadow displacement. Instead of expressing authentic thoughts, you search for safe comments that maintain social approval but disconnect you from your genuine psychological material. Persona rigidity. Over time, your social mask becomes so habituated that you lose conscious access to the authentic thoughts and feelings that would generate natural conversation. This is why traditional social skills advice often fails. Teaching someone conversation starters or active listening techniques doesn't address the underlying psychological split between authentic self and social persona. You're trying to perform connection while unconsciously protecting against genuine contact. Jung's approach was revolutionary because he understood that social anxiety isn't a skills deficit. It's a sign of psychological authenticity trying to emerge against learned patterns of self-suppression. Comment if you've recognized how childhood experiences might have shaped your conversation patterns. I'm seeing the connection between past conditioning and present filtering. The authentic expression assessment. Jung developed what I call the authentic expression assessment, the ultimate tool for understanding your specific psychological barriers to natural conversation and transforming them into strengths. This assessment reveals exactly which aspects of your authentic self you've been unconsciously suppressing and provides a systematic method for reintegrating them into conscious expression. Jung believed this was essential for what he called individuation, becoming who you truly are, rather than who you think you should be. Here's the specific methodology Jung would use. Begin paying attention to the gap between your internal experience and external expression during conversations. When someone shares something, notice what spontaneous thoughts, feelings, or associations arise in your mind before your conscious filter engages. Let me show you this with 3 different response types to the same statement. Someone says, "I'm thinking about changing careers because I'm not fulfilled at work." The persona response, heavily filtered. "That's interesting. Have you thought about what you'd want to do instead?" The shadow response, authentic but unprocessed. "Yeah, work sucks. I hate my job too. Most people are just stuck in meaningless careers." The integrated response, authentic and conscious. "That feeling of unfulfillment is so real. I've noticed it in myself too. There's something about spending most of our waking hours doing work that doesn't connect to our deeper values. What is it about your current role that feels most disconnected from who you are?" Jung identified 3 types of conversational integration based on how consciously people access their authentic psychological material. Type 1, the unconscious suppressor, heavily filtered, safe responses that maintain social approval but create distance and superficiality. Type 2, the reactive expressor, unfiltered, authentic responses that can overwhelm others because they haven't been consciously processed. Type 3, the conscious integrator, authentic responses that have been filtered through self-awareness rather than social fear, creating genuine connection without overwhelming others. If you've started recognizing which type you typically operate from, you're developing the psychological self-awareness that Jung considered essential for authentic human connection. The ethical implementation. Before I show you how to apply Jung's insights practically, there's an important ethical warning. Knowledge of psychological patterns gives you influence in social situations. Jung wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking." The goal isn't to become more socially powerful, but to become more authentically connected. This means using your understanding of psychological patterns to create genuine relationships rather than to manipulate or impress others. Here are the specific contexts where Jung's approach transforms social interaction. In professional settings, instead of performing competence, share authentic expertise and genuine curiosity. When someone mentions a challenge in your area of knowledge, offer insights from actual experience rather than generic advice. In relationships, replace social pleasantries with genuine interest in the other person's psychological reality. Ask questions that arise from authentic curiosity about their inner experience rather than maintaining conversational momentum. In parenting, model authentic expression by sharing age-appropriate genuine thoughts and feelings rather than maintaining a perfect parental facade that teaches children to suppress authenticity. Here's your personal exercise. For the next week, practice what Jung called conscious authenticity in low-stakes conversations. Before responding to someone, pause and ask yourself, what is my authentic response to what they've shared? Then find a way to express some version of that authentic response rather than defaulting to your habitual social filter. The key insight Jung emphasized is that this work is primarily about your relationship with yourself, not about changing others. When you become more authentic in your expression, you give others permission to be more authentic too, but you can't control their response. This is the two-way mirror effect Jung discovered. As you become more comfortable with your own authentic psychological material, you become more capable of receiving others' authenticity without judgment or discomfort. Comment if you're willing to practice conscious authenticity in your conversations this week. I commit to expressing my authentic responses. The shadow of social influence. Jung understood that any knowledge of psychological patterns carries shadow potential, the risk of using insights about human nature for manipulation rather than connection. I need to address the specific dangers of applying conversational psychology unconsciously. What Jung called the manipulator's shadow emerges when people use psychological insights to gain social advantage rather than create authentic connection. This shadow manifests in three specific patterns. The pseudo-authentic performer, using calculated vulnerability and strategic personal sharing to create false intimacy while maintaining emotional distance. The psychological button pusher, deliberately triggering others' psychological patterns to gain compliance or admiration without regard for their well-being. The conversation collector, treating social interactions as opportunities to practice techniques rather than genuine chances for human connection. Here are the warning signs Jung would watch for. Feeling satisfied when you successfully read someone rather than when you genuinely connect. Planning your vulnerabilities strategically rather than sharing authentically in the moment. Judging others based on their psychological patterns rather than meeting them with compassion. Using insights about conversation to avoid your own authentic self-disclosure. The antidote Jung prescribed was radical self-application. Every technique you learn about conversation must first be applied to understanding your own psychological patterns. Every insight about others' social behavior must be examined for what it reveals about your own unconscious social strategies. Remember that everyone you meet is carrying their own psychological wounds, defense mechanisms, and attempts at authentic connection. The person who seems socially confident may be performing just as much as the person who seems anxious. Your role isn't to analyze them, but to show up as authentically as possible and let genuine connection arise naturally. Jung insisted that the highest ethical use of psychological knowledge is creating conditions where others feel safe to be authentic, not becoming more skilled at reading or influencing them. The authenticity mirror effect. Jung discovered something profound about authentic conversation that most people never realize. When you show up authentically in social interaction, you create what I call the authenticity mirror effect. Let me share a personal story that illustrates this principle. Early in my journey with Jung's work, I found myself at a networking event, feeling my usual social anxiety. Instead of trying to impress people or ask strategic questions, I decided to practice authentic presence. When someone asked what I did, instead of my polished professional description, I said, "I study why people feel disconnected from each other and try to understand what creates genuine human connection." Something shifted immediately. Instead of the usual surface-level professional exchange, this person began sharing their own struggles with loneliness and their search for meaningful relationships. Other people were drawn into our conversation because they sensed something real happening. Jung understood that authenticity operates at multiple levels simultaneously. The personal mirror. When you express authentic thoughts, you give others permission to access their own authentic thoughts. The emotional mirror. When you share genuine feelings, you create space for others to acknowledge their genuine feelings. The psychological mirror. When you acknowledge your own struggles and growth, you invite others to recognize their own human journey. The existential mirror. When you engage with life's deeper questions, you activate others' capacity for meaningful reflection. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But he also discovered that when you take steps toward accepting yourself completely, you become a catalyst for others' self-acceptance. This is why people are magnetically drawn to authentic individuals, not because they're perfect, but because they create space for everyone to be more real. This mirror effect explains why some conversations leave you feeling energized and connected while others drain you completely. Authentic exchange creates energy because both people are accessing their genuine psychological vitality rather than maintaining protective facades. The authentic conversationalist. Jung envisioned a transformed way of being that emerges when someone fully integrates authentic expression into their social identity. This isn't about becoming a better conversationalist, but about becoming someone for whom conversation naturally flows, because you're no longer fighting against your own psychological nature. The integrated authentic conversationalist embodies specific characteristics Jung identified. Spontaneous depth. You naturally move conversations toward meaningful topics, because superficial exchange feels psychologically incomplete. Comfortable silence. You can tolerate pauses in conversation without anxiety, because you trust that authentic responses will arise when they're needed. Emotional honesty. You share feelings and struggles appropriately because you understand that vulnerability creates connection rather than weakness. Curious presence. You ask questions from genuine interest rather than social obligation, making others feel truly seen and valued. Paradoxical confidence. You're simultaneously more humble, aware of your own psychological patterns, and more confident, not dependent on others' approval for self-worth. Picture your life when conversation becomes a natural expression of your authentic self, rather than a performance you have to manage. Professional relationships deepen because colleagues sense your genuine interest in their perspectives. Friendships become more meaningful because you're sharing your actual thoughts and experiences rather than maintaining social masks. Even brief interactions with strangers become opportunities for real human connection. Jung acknowledged this transformation requires genuine courage. You'll face moments when your authenticity makes others uncomfortable. You'll encounter situations where being real creates temporary conflict or rejection. Some relationships built on mutual performance may not survive your increased authenticity. But Jung promised something profound emerges from this process. You develop what he called psychological sovereignty, a sense of self that isn't dependent on others' approval or understanding. From this foundation, conversation becomes an expression of who you are rather than a strategy for getting what you need. The price of this transformation is releasing your attachment to being universally liked or understood. The reward is discovering what genuine human connection feels like when both people are showing up authentically. The developmental journey. Jung's ultimate goal wasn't just better conversation, but what he called conscious relationship, the ability to connect authentically with others while maintaining your psychological integrity. This develops gradually through predictable stages. The integration process Jung identified unfolds through 5 distinct phases. Stage 1, recognition, becoming conscious of your filtering patterns and the gap between your internal experience and external expression. This stage often involves discomfort as you realize how much of yourself you've been suppressing. Stage 2, experimentation, beginning to express more authentic thoughts in safe relationships and low-stakes situations. You're learning to trust your spontaneous responses while developing discernment about appropriate expression. Stage 3, integration. Your authentic voice becomes more natural and consistent across different contexts. You no longer feel like you're performing different personalities for different audiences. Stage 4, refinement. You develop sophisticated ability to express authentic thoughts in ways that create connection rather than conflict. Your authenticity serves relationship rather than just self-expression. Stage 5, transcendence. Conversation becomes a natural flow of genuine human connection. You're no longer thinking about what to say, because authentic responses arise spontaneously from your psychological presence. Jung emphasized that each stage involves productive discomfort. You're literally rewiring neural pathways that were formed to protect you from social rejection. Your psyche will initially resist authenticity, because it feels dangerous based on past conditioning. The key insight Jung offered is that this discomfort signals psychological growth rather than social failure. When you feel nervous about expressing an authentic thought, that's often your psyche recognizing an opportunity for greater integration and aliveness. The collective transformation. Jung understood that individual psychological development creates ripple effects that extend far beyond personal benefit. When you become more authentic in conversation, you're contributing to what he called collective consciousness evolution. Here's how this works. Authenticity is psychologically contagious. When someone encounters genuine human presence, it activates their own capacity for authenticity. They leave your interactions slightly more connected to their own psychological reality and more likely to express authentically in their next social encounter. Jung acknowledged that this process faces significant resistance. Our culture often rewards performance over authenticity, cleverness over depth, agreement over honest dialogue. Many people have become so disconnected from their authentic selves that genuine expression feels foreign or threatening. But Jung believed that authentic individuals serve as psychological pioneers, demonstrating possibilities for human connection that inspire others to risk greater authenticity. Each conversation where you show up genuinely creates a small field of permission for others to be more real. This connects to Jung's vision of collective transformation through individual development. As more people integrate authentic expression into their social identity, the overall quality of human conversation and connection improves. We move from a culture of performed social interaction toward one of genuine human exchange. You become part of what Jung saw as an evolutionary process, humanity developing greater capacity for authentic relationship as a species. Your willingness to risk genuine expression in conversation contributes to this larger transformation of human social potential. The choice for authenticity. Remember Jung's insight that started our journey. People who never run out of things to say haven't developed superior social skills. They've developed superior access to their authentic psychological material. You now understand the unconscious conversation stream that your psyche naturally generates and how psychological filtering systems developed to protect you from perceived rejection, but ultimately disconnect you from your genuine conversational capacity. You are someone who chose to explore the deeper psychological dimensions of human connection rather than settling for surface-level social performance. This positions you among those Jung called the individuating, people willing to become authentically themselves in relationship with others. Your next step is implementing conscious authenticity in your daily conversations, starting with the commitment to notice the gap between your internal experience and external expression. From there, gradually practice expressing more of your authentic thoughts while maintaining respect for others' psychological reality. If you want to explore Jung's insights about psychological projection and how we unconsciously assign our internal patterns to others in conversation, check out my video on Reading People. What you see says more about you than them. You have everything you need to transform your conversational experience from performance anxiety into authentic human connection. The question isn't whether you're capable of this transformation. It's whether you're willing to risk being genuinely yourself in relationship with others. Comment below. I choose authentic expression over social safety if you're ready to begin this journey towards psychological authenticity in all your conversations. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.